So welcome back to the King Center's 2023 Beloved Community Summit. I am Jill Savitt. I am the CEO and president of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights here in Atlanta. And I will be moderating a panel today that is entitled, How the Quest for Power and Self-Centered Security Derailed the Course of Humanity. We're going to explore how this I must win, I, me, mine, us versus them mentality, how that and the desires to conquer at the expense of lives and community have affected us, where that leads us. And we will examine how to reconcile, how we get back to who we were before we got derailed. So with that, I have some people joining me for this discussion today, and I want to introduce our panelists. So I'm going to call out each one of them and have them say where they're from, what organization they represent, and how they come to be part of the Beloved Community Summit. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Gail Christopher.
Hello. Hi, I'm Gail Christopher, Executive Director of the National Collaborative for Health Equity, and it's my honor to be part of this global summit, I think for the second time. I think I participated about 2 years ago.
Right. It's great to see you again, Dr. Christopher.
Yes.
Next, we have Greta Tellis. Greta.
Hi, everyone. I'm Greta Rios from Mexico. I know my name is very long and very confusing, so don't worry. I am here for the third time. I really love this gathering of super amazing people and minds and hearts. I'm calling now as the Community Building Director at an organization called People Powered, but I'm also a founder of Olin, which is a Mexican NGO devoted to democracy. So I've been working with democracy, in particular participatory democracy, for many years now. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Yusuf Enriquez.
Hello, good morning. Yusuf Enriquez, founder and CEO of Indigenous AI. We are a for-profit company that's driving precision health equity using emerging technologies such as next-gen sequencing. And our goal is to increase more diversity in clinical trials so that the benefits of these and efficaciousness of the drugs that we're taking in vaccine benefits all, including Black and brown populations. Pleasure to be here. I think this is my second time as well being invited. So pleasure to meet the rest of the panelists and the moderator as well.
Yeah, welcome to you all. So we're going to have a wide-ranging conversation about how we got to this place and what we can do about it. And to frame our conversation, we have two quotations from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I'm going to read to just set the tone for our conversation. And those are, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And then the second quotation is, in spite of spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing. There is a sort of poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers, and I'll add as sisters. So let's let that ring in our ears for just a moment as we think about this idea of how we got derailed. And so I would like to start with that and do a round robin with each of you about this idea. We weren't always this disconnected. We weren't always this polarized. I don't know if you were, first, do you agree with that? Is this a new or a deeper level of disharmony that we feel. What has happened to us to bring us to this moment where it feels like a cultural food fight, a political food fight, an emotional food fight that we're in? Dr. Christopher, maybe we could start with you. Have we always been this way, or is this a new level of low?
I think there's a tendency to romanticize the past, and but I think I'm not a historian or an anthropologist, so I have to put out that caveat. But I think if you look at the Western civilization and the evolution of the Western mind, it's been shaped by a set of beliefs that have led to this hierarchy of societies and values. I think if you look at more indigenous cultures all around the world and their interaction with what we call the Western mind and they used to call it the Enlightenment era and the European mind, then you saw this clash of cultures. I believe that many of our African ancestors and indigenous cultures around the world, the sense of community, the sense of connectedness, the sense of connection not only to one another but to nature and to the natural forces upon which we depend. I think those values are endemic in many of the cultures of indigenous people. So to say, have we always been this way? I think it has to do with who's the we, and it has to do with the historic dynamics or the dominant belief systems. If we come to America, America was founded on selfishness and greed and this false belief in a hierarchy of humanity, and we've never dealt with that. We've never jettisoned that core belief, and so I think it just continues to grow and manifest in our society.
Yeah, thank you for that context setting. Greta, how do you think that we're at a new low? And in particular, listening to Dr. Christopher, yes, a lot of this has been in place. Technology and the speed at which hate can circulate now feels like it's adding fuel to a fire that maybe is long simmering. How do you feel the nature of political conversation and has changed, or has it changed?
Well, it certainly is a very important question, I think. I do think that politically we are at a very obscure time throughout the world. This is not a US based problem or any country based problem. To be honest, I hadn't felt that this possibility of maybe we're not waking up as humanity tomorrow since the 80s. So I do think that there is something going on out there that is very dark, but also that is an opportunity for us to understand where we're standing. I really think that, I don't know, maybe some years ago in 2016, um, I really think that we came to realize that we weren't as advanced as we thought. And what I'm referring to is that I really thought that we as humanity, we had evolved out of things like racism and exclusion and these far right, far left movements. And 2016 came to teach us that that is not the case, that we are still in a very polarized society, that we are still having different conditions and different opportunities for different groups of people, and that we were just hiding from it, that we were just not seeing it for what it is. So it's really sad and it's really, really, really worrying to me, because I mean, like, I've been working my whole life, and I'm pretty sure that all of you in this panel and a lot of the people who are watching are in the same situation. We've been working so hard to get there, and I really thought, and we really thought that we had advanced a little bit more, but we haven't. So I think this is a time for reflection. This is a time to understand where we stand and what we can do to get there, because otherwise I don't see a lot of future happening, and that is very, very worrisome.
Thank you for that. So it's always been, and maybe it was under the surface, and leaders around the world gave permission in many ways by leading from a place of hate, gave permission for hate that was always there to come to the fore in maybe new ways, but maybe just the same old ways. And then there's technology that supercharges it. Yusuf, what you work in the field of science and technology and the ways that those things impact society. Do you think that we're prepared for science and technology in the conditions that we find ourselves of people of polarization and discontent?
I know that it's all a great question, and I think always good feedback that we got from Dr. Christopher and Ms. Rios. Um, what I'm seeing is what's disappointing was, during the George Floyd era over the last 2 years, toppled with the pandemic, to the point, I think technology helped highlighted how polarized we were, because previously to technology, you would just hear about these things. And I think, a lot of us wanted and hoped that we were in a better place, but technology is really, with the power of a cell phone, as you can see, have highlighted, I think, things that has been going on before I was born. So I think, those are things that I've seen technology do on one end that has, really brought attention to the polarization at the level that it's been. I do agree that over the last, 6, 7 years, that it's been done at the highest point that I've ever seen it. Previously, it was pretty much done in silo, but I think, to your point, leaders around the globe have kind of given permission to show the type of high level hate, and then technology was there to capture it, which is, I think, is a little different from the 60s and the 70s when that wasn't possible. And it's the same thing in science, and where, I'm a little bit worried, and why I started Indigenous, because you're still seeing that digital divide. Even though we're moving into the 21st century, we're now seeing bias in some of these technologies that are supposed to be helping streamline and bring different communities within healthcare and science together. We're starting to see that be a little bit more polarized and divided, where it's still the wealthy and the rich that are benefiting from some of these technology. Although, again, low and middle income countries are still suffering. And that gives you an example with the vaccines, right? 1.2 billion people on the continent were waiting for the Western countries to throw away or feel like giving African countries, and other third world countries vaccine that we had here stockpiled. And that's where the level of where I've seen humanity kind of shift, because even in a pandemic, there was still economic gain put over life. And so that was real disappointing to me from a healthcare standpoint in a public health crisis. So yeah, I think technology has kind of highlighted how divided we are and polarized we are, and again, how we fix it. I think that's why we have this panel here to kind of dive into some of those things and reflect on how we could make sure that we're not going into the future with those same mindsets.
That's a great segue to really the essence of this panel, which is this I and mine must win ideology. I, me, mine. We live in a culture where that is the norm. That's the air we breathe. How can people begin to resist that? What kinds of steps can individuals take to keep a communal community focus and think about the rising tide that would lift all the boats rather than selfishness? How do we combat the atmosphere of selfishness as individuals and come together to oppose it? Again, we'll go around and get some thoughts. So again, Dr. Christopher, I'll start with you.
Well, I appreciate my colleagues on the panel and agree with what's been said. This is really a spiritual journey. The mindset and the heart set, which is in alignment with the beloved community principles. The answer to the how is it starts with me. It starts with my belief. It starts with how I feel I deserve love so that I can extend that love that I have received to others. The work of transforming our society in on so many levels, the love that has to become our ethos, it starts with individuals. It starts with a capacity to love ourselves and to extend that love to others. Those who call themselves strong men leaders and who are so proposed or predisposed to violence and hatred, underneath that is a great deal of fear and a great deal of self hatred. And I believe that Dr. King and his wife, Coretta Scott King, I know they understood that spiritual dimension. And so, one of the ways that we start and move this journey forward is through this transformation of ourselves into a state of appreciation for the divine and the natural forces that are, in fact, the most powerful forces in the universe. That's the real power. And I believe that that way of being is, as I said, very characteristic of many of the indigenous cultures in the world, including my own African ancestors.
I'll just stay on this for a second with you, Dr. Christopher. It is so hard in the moment when people are saying hateful things, or when you even see people interacting in the supermarket or wherever you are in hateful ways, to feel love. It is hard to do that. What advice do you have for people to cultivate that mindset?
I believe it's definitely different types of self discipline are required. The mind body arena in terms of meditating, prayer is a very important tool. Being having the disciplines to where we practice every day out in a love mindset. I believe that the mindset we carry has a lot to do with what we attract into our experience. And so it really does start with the self, and it also gets reinforced in terms of being in relationship with others where this expectation, of love and kindness and generosity of spirit, that it really is the predominant. Now, there's a lot of work for us to do as activists, and I'm so impressed, Youssef, with the work you're doing with artificial intelligence, because, our algorithms that we are using today, they embody the hierarchy belief systems. They embody in many ways the hate and discrimination that has characterized our society from its inception. So we have to challenge that, and we really have to come to that work. But to get through it without trauma, to get through it with minimal trauma, requires that we develop some self-care and self-disciplines that enable us to stay in a less stressful, more generative and more positive mindset.
Thank you for that. Greta, the the people we elect set a tone for society, and you work on democracy protection and healthy democracy. How is it that we can make this a priority for leaders to set a different kind of tone?
Well, I would start by asking the people to demand having selfless leaders, which is something that we're not seeing a lot these days. It appears to me that leaders, maybe, and maybe I am romanticizing the past, as Dr. Christopher just said, but it seems to me that leaders, at least the ones that you read about in history books, they were more about having a sense of mission and having a sense of leading the people, and having a sense of, like giving back to the society. And for me, what I'm seeing in leaders around the world right now, it's more about a quest for power and glory and fame and, things that do not necessarily combine with being in power. So it's very easy for people who become elected for the wrong reasons to lose it, no, to just go wild and start doing weird things. So I think what we need to do as citizens is demand having better quality leaders, no, and I know it's hard, no, sometimes when you're voting in the US, you have two options, and like none of them are amazing, none of them are loving, none of them are, but that's not going to change if we as citizens do not change. And I think as societies, we also need to somehow overcome this concept of the zero sum approach, where whatever I win means that someone else has to lose it. That's not how it works, people. Like, we can create value together. We can make the pie bigger, which means that I can gain and you can gain together if we work together. If we stay on the course of things the way that we're working right now, of course it's going to be a zero sum forever. But if we really, really, really put our minds and our work to it, we can truly create a society where everyone is gaining more. But we have to work for it, and I'm not sure. I hope we are ready. I mean, that is an assumption that I do every day because otherwise I would not be working for democracy. But I really think that we need to step up to this challenge.
Thank you for that. Yusuf, you work in a field where there's a huge profit motive around medications, and it's there's a short-term thinking that happens because
Yeah.
ill health of any community affects the health of the entire community, but it's not how the business end is set up. What can be done? What do you see as works to change that dynamic, to change the mindset to a more communal approach to something like public health?
I know, great insight there. I think, where we have to start from is, unfortunately, pandemics help do a little bit of resetting for us, right? We realize that everyone on this panel are for the greater good, and each one of us here would, provide value to our public health system. And so, because I speak in the lens of health and public health and technology, I see an opportunity right now for us to show the value of what it means to come together as a globe to solve some of these huge pandemic issues that we're going to be facing. This won't be the only one. And to Ms. Rios' point, if we don't come together, we'll continue to lose millions of lives for no reason and for an economic gain. And so I think it's the policies of each country in being able to work together that's going to really drive, precision health and medicine going forward. And for over 40, 50 years, it's been predominantly European white males. So you could see the disparities that was already embedded in the current medication we were taking. And so I think what's been very good for us as society is understanding that we're not going to be able to solve some of these large public health issues by ourselves. The US is not going to be the first, or Europe or England is not going to be the first, second to from that winning mentality. This is actually going to require large Western and African countries coming together and solving for something that put the entire globe out of commission the 2 years, which was the pandemic and COVID. So I think, unfortunately, it takes catastrophic events for us to realize that we need each other so that we could start having that mindset of trying to change that, winner takes all mentality and start to work together as communities, because we all know that without each other we're not going to be able to strengthen the ecosystem on how to handle global challenges like the pandemic and other issues. So that's where again I think public health has a huge impact right now within this ecosystem and trying to change the narrative of having this winner take all mentality. And then again, forcing some of these large pharmaceutical companies. I mean, just give you an example of Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, what my grandmother and grandparents are paying from medication with the salaries that they have is just absolutely ridiculous. And so, we've started to see some tightening of the belt around, making sure that our senior citizens are getting some level of benefit from being that they've worked all their lives and being able to afford the medication that they need instead of going into bankruptcy trying to just live day to day, which is a tragedy. So hopefully what we're seeing is a shaping of policies from different government regulators here in the U.S. and hopefully that could kind of spread throughout other countries as we move forward in being a bigger goal into solving global issues like pandemics and others.
Yeah, I want to. It occurs to me, it is clear that there is progressive organizations have identified ideological adversaries, people with whom we disagree on major policy questions. That's very clear. I'm wondering how each of you would rate the state of cooperation among different organizations, coalitions that largely agree. A lot of organizations suffered budgetary cuts, and there's huge competition, often among allies, for resources in order to do the work that we all do. There have been times where there's been competition among groups that ordinarily align. How have you seen the alignment of groups that ordinarily work together? How are coalitions faring in this I, me, mine mindset? Did, have you all seen progress on that front? Do you feel that coalitions are working well together right now? It's hard not to be influenced by the larger culture in which we all operate. Greta, I'll start with you on that. How is the coalition situation among organizations that you work with?
Oh, you gave me the hard one, huh? I was expecting to piggyback right on Gail's answer. No, I think we're having a hard time, to be honest. In Mexico, in particular, we're living a very, very big polarization thing. So, for example, we are having right now, for the first time in many years, a government that does not believe in civil society. So, funds like official funds for NGOs have been cut down to zero. But not only that, no, we're also facing, like persecution. We get a lot of messages from the IRS, no, like, hey, you have been selected to go on there and audit again, no. So we're having to deal with all of this, and of course that has made the environment very, very, like, hostile. So there's a lot of competition going on. There is a lot of finger pointing. There is a lot of organizations that used to work together now not working together, and it is it is us falling into a trap, right? Which, I mean, somehow seems unavoidable, because when you're fighting for survival, and I think this has to do also with the main topic of this panel. Like, I have to look after myself first, right? I have to make sure that me and my family are okay, and then everybody else, right? So that is happening in civil society right now in Mexico. So it's like everyone its own, like, save yourselves, right? And of course, that is making us weaker, and that is making us fail the people that we serve. But it's really hard. I mean, like, we have been trying to build bigger coalitions. We have been trying, for example, to organize civil society, you know, to do things together and things like that. But there is this sense of mistrust, and there is this sense of who are you, like who asked you to be the leader, right? So yeah, these are things that we will have to overcome, and I really hope that we can do it in a proper way. But it's really hard to speak from the language of love when the people that you're trying to connect with are listening only to the language of fear, right? So yeah, so that's what's happening. I don't have an answer on how to do this. Like my answer every day is to keep on believing and to keep on working and to try and get people to connect and communicate and stuff. But to be honest, it's not a very easy thing to do right now, and it's getting more and more complicated.
Yeah, I want to thank you for your honesty in diagnosing that. I think sometimes among our organizations, we don't call attention to this, but in my experience, it is one of the major stumbling blocks. We hobble ourselves before we even get to the line, and it's because resources are tight and we need to take care of our staffs and our organizations and make sure that we function because people have given us donations and we have to fulfill our obligations, and that often puts us at odds with the very people we should ally with to help us. Yusuf, are you seeing this same kind of dynamic in your field?
Oh, absolutely. It's the war for data has uh quadrupled in the last 2 years. And what we're starting to see is that groups that, should be working together are is a fight for data, because data is the new oil, if you want to frame that. And so in the healthcare sector, we're starting to see a lot of polarization amongst companies, because what we were hoping is to have unity and have individuals to come together to get a better healthcare system where we're not siloed. But what I've seen with some of the large healthcare system, it's a little bit more even divided, because it's the same amount of individuals that's here in the U.S., and that data now becomes economic driver, as you mentioned earlier, for the individual, for stakeholders and shareholders. And so that's hampering some of the health progress that we could do as a community. So I give you an example. Our goal is to increase more diversity in clinical trials. It's tough when you have other companies that are being persuaded to collect that data from underserved, underpopulated communities, and then having that being, in silos for different companies in order to say they have 25% more diverse population in their healthcare system than the other, because it doesn't really solve the overall goal. Because the initiatives are to bring together a large data set from multiple populations and underserved and demographics, including women and minorities, so that we could start to find other areas and targets instead of just continuously developing drugs using 95% European white males. And so, while we had that common goal going into COVID, I've started to see a lot of the divide with us missing out. Some of the different communities are missing out on opportunities to work with larger coalitions and communities because of this need to be the first to aggregate large data set. And so, unfortunately, when these things happen, no one wins, right? It's the reverse of what individuals think. But to your point, it's an economic model that is driving the top 50 and top 500, uh, you know, uh, industry companies. And so they're pretty much on a downhill road. There's no brakes. They can't turn back. And so we're starting to see a lot of companies like myself doing the innovation and trying to build smaller communities to work together to achieve, the greater good around healthcare. But it's a little disappointing that at the level that we are with modernization and technology, we're as divided as we were when we didn't have technology, which is a
Right.
little bit disappointing.
So, Dr. Christopher, no pressure. No pressure, but I always find I'm uplifted from your wise counsel. We came into this session talking about individuals changing their mindset, and certainly that is one of the solutions to this. But this is an organizational challenge where progressive organizations are finding it hard to ally
Mhm.
and work together because of the larger environment in which we operate is corporate and capitalist and all these other things. What kind of advice and wisdom do you have for NGOs to
Well,
try and iron out these differences that are relative, that are this competition that prevents us from moving forward united?
well, thank you for the penetrating question. And I thank both Greta and Youssef for the powerful and honest, transparent answers that you've given. I'll draw from my experience. I had the privilege of being inside philanthropy for a number of years. And we learned from our indigenous grantees, we were going to give a grant at one point and we wanted them to compete for the grant. And they came together and told us we could keep our money if we in fact wanted them to compete. It was the most revelatory moment, right? They said, no, that's not how we operate. We don't compete. But if you can't give money to all of us, then keep it, right? And so it really set up a mind shift within those who were, in power in that moment in terms of the philanthropy. Uh, and so when I joined the organization and we committed to achieving racial equity, we knew we had to fund the leaders in the field, all of the civil rights and racial justice organizations, and because they're the shoulders we were going to stand on if we had this as our platform. But we just made one requirement. We gave them all large operating grants, but we said, we ask you to work together. We ask you to come together on a quarterly basis. We ask you to work together. It was not easy. Really, it was hard. But we knew we had turned a corner when there was a shooting at a Sikh temple, and everyone that was part of that, whether they were representing Native American, Asian American, African American, European, everyone that was around that table stood up and said, basically, if you destroy their temple, you're destroying all of our temples. And it was one of the most dramatic moments. So what am I saying? I'm saying that it's done by one step at a time in terms of bringing small groups together and learning to build authentic relationships with one another, not because you want something from them necessarily, but because you need each other. And I have found that people, once they had a chance to be together, they began to see each other and to see themselves in one another. They began to see the commonality in their struggles. And when they all stood up for the smaller group, the Sikh temple, something transformed within the larger group in terms of a moment of acknowledging the shared humanity. So, but I want to pick up on Greta's comment about the leaders that don't value civil society. And I think it plays to what you were saying, Youssef, in terms of the tremendous profits that these pharmaceutical industries and others are allowed to gain. The most important arena for us to play in right now is election, is democracy, is voting. We have we have to understand that who we elect as leaders, they determine the direction of our country. And so I think that no matter whether we're health equity or democracy or education, we have to really put at the top of our agenda, making sure, particularly young voters, right? 27% of the young voters voted in this last election. We got to move that up to 80%. And how did they vote? They voted for progressive issues. So I think from an action standpoint, the most important issue in front of all of us, and I'm sure it's probably true in your country, in Mexico, and around the world, we somehow have to put people in place who can lead from a different mindset that's not just greed based and fear based and hate based.
Here, here. Greta, did you want to add into that?
Well, sure. Thank you for that, Gail. I really think that political participation is something that we all need to get engaged in. And I know that it feels a little bit counterintuitive because the government and democracy itself has let us down so many times in so in such horrible ways. But I think that our response to that, which is like, okay, so I step back from it. I don't want to participate in this system that does not represent me. Actually, what it does is it makes sure that you will never be represented, right? So it is something that maybe it's counterintuitive, but we need to occupy these places. We need to make sure that political parties are true to their values, whatever they are. I mean, it can be something I don't believe in, but I would expect in Mexico, for example, now we have coalitions that from parties that are representing the far right and the far left, and they go together to elections, and it's like, how come? I mean, it's very clear to me that those guys only want to get elected into office for the wrong reasons, right? So even if it's a political party that I do not agree with, which is totally okay, but I would be expecting to hold it accountable and to stick to its values and to have leaders that really represent what the party stands for. So to just to wrap it up, we as citizens, we need to take these spaces back, and we need to make sure that they are representing what they are supposed to be representing. And that, I think that if we win that battle, we will be able to advance in every other front, because this will enable, like the agenda to for climate change and for racial equity and for women and for everything to actually move ahead. But if we don't, if we stay, angry, and if we stay feeling underrepresented, then that will just make the status quo prevail. And I mean, that benefits the bad guys, right?
Yeah. So we actually need to wrap up. That went so quickly. I it snuck up on me. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think to try and draw some action points, which I think all of these panels as part of the summit are trying to do, is that every organization that's working, whatever the issue, needs to put a focus on voting and voter participation and engagement. Whatever we're doing, it is our responsibility to contribute together to that major push. That is one way that whatever we work on, whatever our positions, climate change, medical, health care, is this idea of protecting democracy through voting, encouraging people to vote, and making sure that people have access to vote. And I would say one other point that has been raised, and this is something that I have just diagnosed as being from my role, is that this changing our mindset individually is certainly important, but leaders of NGOs need to also change organizational mindsets. This idea of transformation, it starts with me, but it starts with us, and that organizations also need to have a collaborative spirit so that we can work together better, because we won't even get to the point of addressing those who disagree with us if we continue to disagree with each other. So thank you so much for your participation in this panel. This conversation has been really meaningful. And I will turn it back to the moderators of the summit. Thanks so much for participating.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for
Thank you.
moderating. It
Appreciate
was
it.
wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure meeting
Thank
you all.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, same here.